At my daughter's wedding, her fiancé shoved my face into the cake and called me a beggar in front of 200 guests. Everyone laughed. My daughter stood frozen, humiliated. Then someone in the crowd recognized my name and shouted something that made the entire room go silent. The groom's face turned white. What happened in the next 5 minutes changed everything.
Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and write in the comments section where you're watching from, so I'll know how far my story has gone.
The chandeliers above the Ritz-Carlton ballroom caught the light like frozen stars. I stood near the entrance, watching Sophia adjust her veil in front of the gilded mirror, and for a moment, time collapsed. I saw her at 7 years old, sobbing because the kids at school said her lunch smelled funny. I'd packed her leftover spaghetti, all we had that week. I saw her at 14, the night her mother died, when she crawled into my lap even though she was too old for it, and whispered, "What do we do now, Dad?" I saw her at 18, opening her acceptance letter to Northwestern, tears streaming down her face as she grabbed my hands and screamed, "We did it!" We. That word carried us through everything. I'd raised her alone in our Lincoln Park 2-bedroom, the same apartment where I'd rocked her to sleep after her mother's funeral, where I'd taught her to ride a bike in the narrow hallway, where we'd celebrated every birthday with grocery store cake and too many candles. And now, she was getting married. She turned from the mirror, and her smile was pure sunlight. "Dad, you're crying." I wasn't, not visibly, but something behind my ribs was breaking in the best way. "You look like your mother," I said. Sophia crossed the room and straightened my tie, the same gray one I'd worn to her graduation, her first job interview, every milestone that mattered. Her fingers trembled slightly. "Are you ready for this?" I wanted to say yes. I wanted to tell her that Garrett Ashford III was a good man, that his family's icy politeness at the rehearsal dinner was just nerves, and the way his mother, Patricia, had looked at my worn shoes and said, "How quaint," was simply her version of warmth. But fathers lie for their daughters. It's in the job description. "I'm ready," I said. What I didn't say, I'd already activated what I privately called the Clearwater Agreement, a decision I'd made years ago, a line I'd drawn in the sand about who I was, who I'd allow the world to see, and what happened when someone crossed that line. The Ashfords saw a poor man, a widower who drove an old car and wore the same suit to every event, someone Sophia was marrying away from, as Patricia had phrased it over champagne last month, her eyes sliding over me like I was furniture. The wedding march began. Sophia looped her arm through mine, and we started down the aisle. The ballroom was a museum of wealth, ice sculptures, imported roses, a string quartet playing something expensive and forgettable. The Ashfords filled the right side, all pressed suits and inherited jewelry. My side was smaller, friends from the old neighborhood, Sophia's college roommates. People who knew us when us meant everything. Garrett waited at the altar, his smile wide and white and empty. I gave Sophia's hand to him, kissed her cheek, took my seat, and waited for the clock to run out on the man who had no idea what was about to happen.
The rehearsal dinner had been 6 months earlier, at some exclusive club in Greenwich with a waiting list longer than my mortgage used to be. I'd driven 8 hours to get there, navigating my Toyota through neighborhoods where the driveways cost more than most homes. Patricia Ashford had greeted me at the entrance, her handshake limp and cold. She wore pearls that probably had names. Her eyes swept over my gray suit, the same one, always the same one, and her smile tightened like a drawstring. "Chase, darling," she'd said, though we both knew she'd never use that word sincerely. "How resourceful of you to make the drive. I do hope the GPS didn't confuse you. These neighborhoods can be rather exclusive." Translation: you don't belong here. Sophia had rushed over, linking her arm through mine, her laugh too bright. "Dad's great with directions, Mrs. Ashford. He built his whole business on logistics." Patricia's eyebrow had arched. "Business? How industrious." She'd said it the way you'd compliment a child's macaroni art. Dinner was worse. I'd been seated at the far end of the table, wedged between Garrett's college roommate, some hedge fund analyst who spent 40 minutes explaining cryptocurrency like I was a caveman discovering fire, and an empty chair that stayed empty. A statement seat. Garrett had stood halfway through the appetizers, champagne glass raised, his smile performative and sharp. A toast to my beautiful bride-to-be. "Sophia, you've worked so hard to get where you are. Northwestern, marketing director at 27. And you did it all despite, well, let's just say you didn't start with much." The table had laughed. Polite, knowing laughter. Sophia's face had flushed. She'd looked at me across the table, her eyes screaming apologies. I'd raised my water glass, smiled, said nothing. Because I'd learned something a long time ago, something that built empires quieter than shouting ever could. Sometimes the best revenge is timing. The engagement party 3 months later had been no better. It was held at Garrett's parents' estate, 12 acres of sculpted hedges and inherited arrogance. I'd arrived in my Toyota, parking it among the Teslas and Mercedes like a rust stain on silk. Garrett had intercepted me at the door, drink in hand, his grin loose and cruel. "Jace, glad you could make it. Here, take this, would you?" He'd shoved my coat into my arms before I could respond. "Oh, wait, you're not the valet? God, sorry, you just have that, look, you know?" His groomsman had erupted in laughter. Sophia had appeared at my elbow, her jaw tight. "Garrett, stop. I'm kidding, babe. Your dad knows I'm kidding. Right, Jace?" He'd clapped me on the shoulder, hard enough to sting. "You've got a sense of humor. You'd have to, raising a kid on, what was it, delivery truck money?" I'd folded his coat over the nearest chair, looked him dead in the eye. "Logistics," I'd said quietly. "Not delivery trucks." He laughed like I'd told a joke, but Sophia had seen it. The flicker behind my calm, the line he'd just stepped over without realizing the ground beneath him was already crumbling. She'd pulled me aside later, near the garden fountain, tears brimming. "Dad, I'm so sorry. He doesn't mean it. He doesn't understand." "Understand what?" "That you're enough, that you've always been enough." I cupped her face, the way I had when she was small and the world felt too big. "I know who I am, Sophia. The question is whether he deserves to know you." She'd looked away. And I'd known right then that this wedding would be the moment everything came to light.
The Clearwater Agreement wasn't written on paper. It existed in the space between who I was and who people needed me to be. I made it the night my wife died. Sophia had been 14. We'd sat in the hospital parking lot at 3 a.m, the engine ticking as it cooled, neither of us ready to go home to the apartment that would feel too quiet.
She'd looked at me with swollen eyes and asked, "What happens to us now?" I didn't have an answer. Not then. But I had a company, a small logistics firm I'd started in my 20s, routing shipments for mid-sized manufacturers across the Midwest. It was growing faster than I'd planned, spinning off divisions, attracting investors I didn't want. People were starting to use words like empire and tycoon. They wanted me at galas, on magazine covers, in boardrooms where everyone wore their wealth like armor. I looked at my daughter that night and made a choice. I restructured everything under a holding company, Clearwater Holdings, and hired a CEO to be the public face. I kept majority control, kept the strategy, kept the growth, but I stepped back from the spotlight, sold the penthouse, bought the modest 2-bedroom in Lincoln Park, kept the Toyota, kept the gray suit. I told Sophia we were downsizing to save for her future. She never questioned it. But the truth was simpler and more stubborn than that. I refused to let money raise my daughter. I'd seen what inherited wealth did to people like the Ashfords, how it calcified them, made them mistake a trust fund for character. I wanted Sophia to know struggle, to understand that worth isn't measured in stock portfolios or country club memberships. I wanted her to know the value of enough. So I lived small, worked quiet, built an empire from a laptop at a kitchen table while my daughter did her homework across from me, neither of us realizing she was sitting 3 feet from a man who controlled supply chains across 4 continents. Clearwater Holdings grew into a private equity giant. We owned ports in Seattle, warehouses in Frankfurt, distribution networks from Singapore to Sao Paulo. By the time Sophia graduated college, the firm was valued at over $8 billion. And not a single person at her graduation knew I owned it. That was the Clearwater Agreement, a promise I made to myself and to the memory of my wife. I would never use wealth to define worth. Not mine, not Sophia's, not anyone's. But there was a clause in that agreement, an unspoken corollary I'd carried like a blade in my pocket, hoping I'd never need to draw it. If I ever had to remind the world who I was, they'd remember. Not because I wanted the attention, not because I needed the validation, but because some lessons can only be taught through consequence. I'd watched Garrett humiliate me at the rehearsal dinner, at the engagement party, at every interaction where he mistook my humility for weakness. I'd let him, because Sophia loved him, and I loved her more than my pride. But love has limits, and Garrett Ashford III was about to discover exactly where mine ended. The reception was in full swing now. The vows had been spoken. Sophia was married. My job, walking her down the aisle, giving her away, was done, which meant the Clearwater Agreement was no longer in effect. I stood near the gift table, watching Garrett laugh with his groomsmen, drunk on champagne and his own inflated sense of superiority. He had no idea the ground beneath him had already shifted, and in about 5 minutes, neither would anyone else in this room.
The wedding rehearsal had been last night. Same ballroom, different energy. Stripped of flowers and grandeur, the space felt clinical, like a surgical theater preparing for an operation. I'd arrived early, habit from years of meetings where being first meant controlling the room. But this wasn't my room to control. The Ashfords had made that abundantly clear. Patricia swept in with her event coordinator, a nervous woman clutching an iPad like a shield. They rearranged the seating chart without consulting me. I watched my assigned table shift farther from the head table with each passing minute, until I was positioned near the kitchen entrance, close enough to hear the clatter of plates being stacked. "It's better this way," Patricia had said when she finally acknowledged me. "The kitchen staff can serve your table first. You won't have to wait." Her smile was all teeth, no warmth. "We're thinking of you, Jace." No, she wasn't. She was erasing me. The rehearsal itself was a performance of belonging I wasn't invited to join. Garrett's best man, a corporate attorney named Pierce, led the toasts. He raised his glass with the kind of practiced confidence that comes from never being told no. "To traditions," he said. "To families that understand legacy. To Garrett, who's found a woman worthy of the Ashford name." Worthy of the name. As if Sophia had passed some test. I wasn't asked to speak. There was no moment where the father of the bride could offer words, share a memory, toast her daughter's future. Patricia had orchestrated the evening down to the minute, and that minute didn't include me. Sophia noticed. Of course she did. She caught my eye across the room and mouthed, "I'm sorry." I shook my head, smiled, mouthed back, "It's okay." But it wasn't okay, and we both knew it. After the rehearsal, she found me in the parking lot. I'd been standing by my Toyota, keys in hand, debating whether to drive around Chicago for a few hours or go back to my empty apartment and stare at the ceiling. "Dad, wait!" She jogged over, heels clicking on the pavement. Still in her rehearsal dress, she looked so much like her mother it hurt. "Dad, I didn't know they do that. I told Garrett you should speak. I told him—" "Sophia," I caught her hands. They were trembling. "It's your wedding, not mine. If this is what makes them happy, then I'm happy." "But you're not," she voice cracked. "You're never happy anymore. Not around them, not around him." And she wasn't wrong. "Do you love him?" I asked. The question hung between us like smoke. "Yes," she said finally, but she couldn't meet my eyes when she said it. "Then that's all that matters." I kissed her forehead the way I had 1,000 times before. Over her shoulder, I saw Garrett watching from the entrance, his expression unreadable. He raised his glass to me, a mock salute, then turned and walked back inside. I held my daughter a moment longer, feeling the weight of every compromise I'd made, every insult I'd swallowed, every moment I'd chosen her happiness over my own dignity. "I love you, Dad. I love you too, sweetheart." When she pulled away and walked back inside, I stood alone in the parking lot. The Chicago skyline glittered in the distance, a city I'd helped build, a fortune I'd hidden, a truth that was about to surface whether I wanted it to or not. I got in my Toyota and drove to my apartment. Tomorrow was her wedding day. Tomorrow I would smile and stay silent and play the role they'd assigned me. And after that, we'd see what happened when patience finally ran out.
The ceremony was perfect. Flawlessly, coldly, mechanically perfect. 200 guests filled the ballroom in orchestrated waves. The Ashford side looked like a Fortune 500 board meeting. Tailored suits, statement jewelry, faces that had never known hunger or doubt. My side was quieter, smaller, real. The string quartet played something classical and expensive, probably commissioned. The kind of music designed to remind you that someone paid for taste you couldn't afford to understand. I sat in the front row, alone. The seat beside me, where Sophia's mother should have been, stayed empty. No one from the Ashford family acknowledged it. To them, empty seats were only statements when they wanted them to be. The ceremony itself was brief. An officiant who spoke in platitudes about love and commitment, without once looking like he believed what he was saying. Garrett's vows were rehearsed, polished, perfect. Sophia's voice trembled when she spoke hers, and I wondered if anyone else noticed. I noticed everything. When the officiant said, "You may kiss the bride," Garrett dipped Sophia like they were on a movie poster. The Ashford side applauded, performative, obligatory. My side clapped because they were happy for her, because they'd watched her grow up, because they remembered when happiness didn't require an audience. The reception began immediately after. Champagne towers, ice sculptures shaped like swans, a 5-tier cake that cost more than my first car. Everything gleamed, everything was for show. The toasts came during dinner. Pierce went first, telling stories about Garrett's college days that were meant to be charming, but mostly revealed how little he'd ever been told no. Patricia went next, welcoming Sophia into the family with words that sounded warm but felt like terms and conditions. Then the DJ called my name. I hadn't prepared anything. Patricia had made it clear at the rehearsal that speeches weren't expected from my side. But Sophia had insisted that morning, pulling me aside before the ceremony with tears in her eyes. "You have to speak, Dad, please, just something." So I stood, walked to the microphone, looked out at 200 faces, half of whom thought I didn't belong there. "I'm not good at speeches," I started. My voice sounded smaller than I had intended. But Sophia asked me to say something, so here we are. A few polite chuckles. Patricia checked her watch. 28 years ago, my wife and I brought Sophia home from the hospital in a car we'd borrowed because ours had broken down that morning. We had no money, no plan, just a daughter who wouldn't stop crying and a future that felt too big to imagine. I found Sophia in the crowd. She was crying already. My wife died when Sophia was 14, and for a long time after that, I didn't know how to be both parents. I didn't know how to braid hair, or pick out dresses, or explain why the world could be so cruel and so beautiful at the same time. But Sophia taught me. Every day, she taught me what strength looked like. The room had gone quiet. Even Patricia had stopped checking her watch. She didn't need wealth to be extraordinary. She didn't need status to be kind. She just needed love. And I've tried every single day to give her that. I paused. "Garrett, you're getting someone remarkable. Someone who knows the value of struggle and the weight of resilience. Don't forget that." I raised my glass. To Sophia, to love, to knowing what's actually worth something. The toast hung in the air for half a beat. Then my side erupted in applause. Sophia was sobbing. Garrett's jaw was tight, his smile frozen. Patricia leaned over to the woman beside her and whispered something that made them both smirk. I sat down. My hands were shaking. Across the room, near the gift table, a woman in her 50s stood staring at me. She wore a burgundy dress and had the kind of sharp, assessing eyes that came from decades in boardrooms. She'd been introduced earlier as Evelyn Kane, a private equity executive from Manhattan, one of Garrett's mother's connections. She was looking at my name tag, then at me, then back at the name tag. Her expression shifted. Recognition, then shock, then something close to alarm. She pulled out her phone, started typing rapidly. I watched her stand, walk toward Patricia, lean in to whisper something urgent. Patricia's face went pale, and that's when I knew. The clock had just run out.
An hour passed, maybe 2. Time had a strange quality at weddings, stretching during speeches, collapsing during dances. I stayed at my table near the kitchen, eating food I couldn't taste, watching my daughter smile in a way that didn't quite reach her eyes. Garrett was drinking. Heavily. I'd noticed it during dinner, the way his laughs got louder, his gestures more expansive. His groomsmen circled him like satellites, feeding his orbit with validation and whiskey. Pierce kept refilling his glass. Someone told a joke I couldn't hear, and Garrett threw his head back, roaring with laughter that felt performative, even from across the room.
Patricia noticed too. I watched her lean over, whisper something sharp in his ear. He waved her off, spilling champagne on the white tablecloth. Sophia saw it. Her smile faltered. She touched his arm, said something that made him pull away slightly, his jaw tight. I should have left then, should have congratulated them from a distance, kissed my daughter goodbye, driven back to my quiet apartment, and let them have their celebration without the man they clearly didn't want there. But Sophia caught my eye, mouthed, "Stay, please." So I stayed. The cake cutting came just before sunset. A photographer positioned them in front of the 5-tier masterpiece. White fondant, sugar flowers, probably worth more than my monthly rent used to be. Garrett grabbed the knife with Sophia, their hands overlapping, and they cut the first slice to applause that felt obligatory. Then came the tradition, the playful feeding. Couples always did it. A small bite, a laugh, a kiss. A moment meant to be sweet. Garrett had other ideas. He scooped a handful of cake and smashed it into Sophia's face, hard. Frosting covered her nose, her carefully applied makeup. She gasped, stumbling backward, and for a second she looked like she might cry. Then she laughed, because what else could she do with 200 people watching? The room erupted in laughter. Garrett high-fived Pierce. Patricia's smile was thin and tight. I stood. I don't know why. Instinct, maybe. The need to check if my daughter was okay, even though she was pretending to be. I crossed the dance floor, weaving between tables, and approached them. Sophia was wiping frosting from her eyes, her smile frozen in place. I pulled a napkin from the nearest table and handed it to her. "You okay?" I asked quietly. She nodded, didn't look at me. I turned to Garrett, extending my hand. A peace offering. A father trying to bridge a gap that probably shouldn't exist. "Congratulations," I said. "Truly." He looked at my hand, then at me. His eyes were glassy, unfocused. His grin was all edges. "The poor dad wants to shake my hand," he announced to his groomsmen. They laughed. "How generous of you, Jace. Really magnanimous." "Garrett," Sophia's voice was warning. "What? He should be thanking me. I'm the one who gave his daughter a life she never could have had with," he gestured vaguely at me, "this." The room had gone quiet. Not silent, but quiet enough that people nearby were starting to watch. I dropped my hand. "I just wanted to congratulate you." "Sure you did." He stepped closer. I could smell the whiskey on his breath. He grabbed the back of my head. Everything slowed down. I saw Sophia's face shift from confusion to horror. I saw Patricia stand, her mouth opening in a shape that might have been protest or shock. I saw Pierce lean forward, grinning like this was the funniest thing he'd ever witnessed. And then Garrett shoved my face down into the cake. Frosting filled my nose, my mouth. The impact rattled my teeth. I felt the layers collapse under the weight and heard laughter explode around me. Genuine, cruel, delighted laughter. "Try some dessert, beggar," Garrett roared. When he pulled me back up, frosting dripped from my face. My gray suit, the same one I'd worn to every important moment of my daughter's life, was ruined. White icing covered my glasses. I couldn't see clearly, but I could hear everything. The laughter, the gasps, someone's phone camera clicking. I wiped my face with shaking hands, found Sophia in the blur. She was frozen, her hand over her mouth, tears streaming down her cheeks.
not from laughter, but from shame. The room was a circus of reactions. Some people were howling. Others looked uncomfortable, glancing away like they'd witnessed something they wished they hadn't. And then, cutting through everything, a voice. Sharp. Female. Shocked. Evelyn Kane stood near the gift table, her phone still in her hand, her face pale. She was staring at me like she'd seen a ghost. She said, "Wait, that's... oh my God." She pointed at me, her hand trembling. "That's Jace Morrison." The laughter died. Confusion rippled through the crowd. Evelyn's voice was stronger now, disbelief turning into certainty. She looked directly at Patricia, then at Garrett. She said, "He's not a beggar. He's not poor. He's the founder of Clearwater Holdings. He's a billionaire." The room went silent. Garrett's face drained of color. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. And standing there, covered in cake, with 200 pairs of eyes suddenly seeing me for the first time, I smiled.
The silence lasted 3 seconds, maybe 4. But in that pocket of stillness, I watched the entire room recalibrate. Evelyn Kane stood frozen, her phone still raised, her face cycling through shock and something close to horror. Around her, people pulled out their own phones, fingers flying across screens, searching, confirming. The name Clearwater Holdings rippled through the crowd in whispers. Garrett stood closest to me, his hand still extended from where he'd shoved me into the cake. His face had gone from flushed red to paper white in the span of a heartbeat. His mouth opened, closed again. No sound came out. "That's impossible," Patricia said from the head table, but her voice cracked. She was staring at me like I'd rearranged the laws of physics. "He drives a Toyota. He lives in a Lincoln Park 2-bedroom. I just Googled him. Jace Morrison, founder and majority owner of Clearwater Holdings. Private equity, $8.3 billion in assets under management." She looked up from her phone, directly at Patricia. "You seated a billionaire next to the kitchen." The room erupted. Not in laughter this time, in chaos. Conversations exploded in every direction, loud, frantic, disbelieving. Garrett's groomsmen had gone quiet, their earlier bravado evaporating like steam. Pierce was scrolling frantically through his phone, his face ashen. Someone near the bar said, "Holy shit, that's the guy who owns the Seattle Port Authority." Another voice, "My firm tried to acquire one of his subsidiaries last year. He turned down $4 billion. I stood in the center of it all, frosting dripping from my chin, and did nothing, said nothing, just watched the dominoes fall. Sophia appeared at my side. Her face was a war zone of emotions, confusion, horror, disbelief, and something that looked like betrayal. "Dad," her voice was barely a whisper, "is this true?" I met her eyes, wanted to explain, wanted to tell her about the Clearwater agreement, about why I'd hidden it, about how I'd only wanted her to know the value of struggle and love without the corruption of wealth. But this wasn't the moment for explanations. "It's true," I said quietly. Her hand flew to her mouth, tears spilled over. "You never told me." "I know." "Why would you—" She couldn't finish. Turned to look at Garrett, who was still frozen, still pale, still utterly silent. Patricia had recovered enough to move. She crossed the dance floor with the kind of purpose that came from decades of managing social disasters. Her smile was forced, her voice too bright. "Well,
This is certainly unexpected. What a lovely surprise! Jace, we had no idea. Yes, you did, I said softly. She stopped. Excuse me? You knew I had a business. Sophia mentioned it several times. You chose not to ask questions because you'd already decided who I was. You wanted a poor man, someone Sophia was escaping from. It made your son look more impressive. Patricia's smile cracked. That's not... Mrs. Ashford, Evelyn Kane stepped forward. I've done business with Clearwater Holdings. Mr. Morrison could buy your family's estate with what he makes in interest in a month. The room had gone quiet again. Everyone was listening now. Garrett finally found his voice. It came out strangled, desperate. Jace, I didn't know. If I'd known, I never would have... He gestured helplessly at the destroyed cake, at my ruined suit. It was just a joke, you know that, right? Just wedding humor. I was drunk, You called me a beggar, I said. My voice was calm, almost gentle. That made it worse, somehow. I didn't mean... You shoved my face into a cake in front of my daughter, in front of 200 witnesses. I took off my glasses, cleaned them slowly. You meant it, Jarrett. You meant every word, every insult, every moment. You made me feel small. Sophia was crying openly now, silent tears that broke something in my chest. I looked at my daughter, this beautiful woman I'd raised alone, and felt the weight of every choice I'd made crash down at once. I need to clean up, I said quietly. I walked towards the restroom. The crowd parted like a biblical sea. No one spoke, no one moved. Behind me, I heard Garrett's voice, high and panicked. Wait! Jace, please! I didn't turn around. Inside the restroom, I locked the door and stared at my reflection. Covered in frosting, glasses smeared, gray suit ruined, but my eyes were steady. They'd wanted a beggar, someone to look down on, someone to make them feel superior. Now they would learn the cost of pride.
I took my time in the restroom, washed the frosting from my face with deliberate care, removed my ruined jacket and tie, leaving just the white dress shirt beneath, rolled up my sleeves, cleaned my glasses until they were spotless. Through the door, I could hear the muffled chaos continuing, voices rising and falling, someone's phone ringing repeatedly, the sharp click of heels on marble, probably Patricia, pacing. When I finally emerged, the ballroom had transformed into something else entirely. Every table had become a research station. Phones glowed like campfires in the dimmed lighting. People huddled in clusters, scrolling, reading aloud, pointing at screens with expressions that ranged from shock to fascination to something close to fear. I caught fragments as I walked back toward the reception area. Acquired the Rotterdam Logistics Network for $2.6 billion. Forbes estimated his net worth at over $9 billion last year. He turned down a merger with Amazon. Sits on the board of 3 Fortune 500 companies. Near the bar, a man in an expensive suit was showing his phone to anyone who would look. This is him. Look, Jace Morrison. There's a photo from a shareholder meeting in 2019. Same face, same gray suit, actually. A woman beside him whispered. Patricia seated him by the kitchen. Garrett called him a beggar. They saw me approaching and went silent. The man pocketed his phone like a student caught passing notes. I nodded to them, kept walking. The dance floor had cleared. Most guests had migrated to the edges of the room, creating a wide, empty space in the center, like they were afraid to occupy the same ground I might walk on. Garrett stood near the ruined cake, surrounded by his groomsmen, but they weren't circling him with validation anymore.
They were standing back, creating distance. Pierce had his phone out, his face pale as he read something that clearly terrified him. "Chase," Garrett's voice cracked when he saw me. He stepped forward, hands raised like he was approaching a wild animal. "Please, can we talk, privately?" "No." "You made a mistake, a terrible mistake. I was drunk. I was stupid. He glanced around at the watching crowd, lowered his voice. "What can I do? How can I fix this?" I looked at him for a long moment. This man who'd handed me his coat like I was hired help, who'd joked about my daughter starting with nothing, who'd shoved my face into a cake and called me a beggar in front of everyone I loved. "You can't," I said simply. Patricia appeared at his side, her composure barely holding. "Mr. Morrison, I think there's been a terrible misunderstanding." "There hasn't." "We simply didn't realize." "You didn't ask." I kept my voice level, almost kind. That made it cut deeper. "In 6 months of knowing your son was marrying my daughter, you never once asked what I did for a living beyond logistics. You never asked about my life, my work, my story. You decided who I was based on a car and a suit." She opened her mouth, closed it. No response came. Across the room I spotted 2 people I recognized, society reporters who'd been invited to cover the Ashford wedding. They were filming now. One had a professional camera out. The other was taking notes, her eyes bright with the kind of excitement that came from stumbling onto a story that would define a career. The headline was already writing itself in real time. "Billionaire humiliated at daughter's wedding by groom." Sophia appeared through the crowd. She'd fixed her makeup, but her eyes were red-rimmed. She walked straight to me, ignoring Garrett's reaching hand. "Dad," she said, "I need to understand. Why didn't you tell me?" It was the question I'd been dreading, the one I owed her an answer to. But not here. Not now. Not with 200 people watching and cameras rolling. "Later," I said quietly. "I promise. But right now I think it's time I leave." "No," her voice was firm. "Don't leave. Please. This is my wedding. You're my father. And I don't care what they think anymore." She took my hand, and in that moment, watching my daughter choose me over the spectacle, over the Ashfords, over the beautiful lies she'd been trying to believe, I realized the revenge I'd been waiting for had already happened. They hadn't just humiliated themselves, they'd shown her who they really were.
Sophia led me through a service corridor, away from the ballroom, away from the cameras and whispers, and the wreckage of her wedding reception. Her hand was tight around mine, her heels clicking urgently against the marble floor. We ended up in a small bridal prep room, the same one where I'd straightened her veil just hours earlier, a lifetime ago. The room still smelled like hairspray and roses. Her makeup kit sat scattered across the vanity, evidence of a morning that had started with hope. She closed the door, leaned against it, then slowly slid down to sit on the floor, wedding dress pooling around her like spilled milk. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. I sat down beside her. The floor was cold through my dress shirt. "You don't have anything to apologize for." "Yes, I do." Her voice broke. "I let them treat you like that for months. I saw it happening, and I just kept asking you to tolerate it, to stay quiet, to let it go. I chose him over you. You chose love, or what you thought was love." She laughed bitterly. "Love? He shoved your face into a cake, Dad. He called you a beggar. That's not love, that's... God, what is wrong with me? Why didn't I see it?" I pulled her hands away gently, the way I used to when she was small and didn't want to face something difficult. Because you wanted to believe in something beautiful. There's nothing wrong with that. But I ignored who he really was, who his family really was. Fresh tears spilled over. Patricia treated you like garbage. I heard her comments. I saw how they seated you at the rehearsal. And I just kept telling myself it would get better after the wedding, that they just needed time to know you. Sophia. And the worst part? Her voice climbed, anguished. The absolute worst part is that you've been a billionaire this entire time. You could have stopped all of this with a single word. You could have made them respect you instantly. But you didn't. You just took it. From me. I was quiet for a moment. Outside, I could hear muffled voices, movement, the wedding continuing in some diminished form. Do you know why I never told you? I asked her. She shook her head. Because the day your mother died, I realized something. Money doesn't teach character. Struggle does. Love does. I wanted you to grow up knowing your value had nothing to do with a bank account. I wanted you to earn everything you achieved, to feel pride in your own work, not inherited wealth. But we could have had an easier life? Maybe. But would you be the woman you are now? The one who worked 2 jobs to help pay for Northwestern? Who built a career from nothing? Who knows the weight of $1 because you've counted them yourself? She was quiet, processing. I lived modestly so you would know what enough actually means. So when you met someone, you choose them for who they are, not what they could give you. And I hid my wealth because I needed to know, really know, who would respect you for you and who would only see you as a stepping stone. Garrett failed that test, she said quietly. Spectacularly. She almost smiled. Then it faded. I think I knew, deep down. I think I saw the red flags and ignored them because I wanted to believe I'd found someone who loved me despite where I came from. But the truth is, he never loved me despite anything. He just saw me as someone he could fix, someone he could elevate, someone whose poor father he could humiliate to feel powerful. I put my arm around her shoulders. She leaned into me the way she had 1,000 times before. As a child after nightmares, as a teenager after heartbreaks, as a young woman facing an uncertain world. You can't build love on humiliation, I said softly. Not his of me, not his of you. Real love doesn't need someone else to be small for it to feel big. She nodded against my shoulder. What do I do now? That's your choice. Not mine. Not his. Yours. The wedding's probably over out there. Probably. Everyone's going to talk about this forever. Definitely. Patricia is going to have a stroke. I'm counting on it. She laughed. Actually laughed. It was small and broken, but real. We sat there on the cold floor, father and daughter, in a prep room that smelled like fading flowers and shattered illusions. Outside, the chaos continued. But in here, in this small, quiet space, we were just us again. The way we had always been. The way we'd always be. I love you, Dad. I love you too, sweetheart. Always have. Always will. No matter what. She squeezed my hand, And for the first time all day, I felt like maybe, just maybe, everything would actually be okay. We stayed in that prep room for maybe 10 minutes, long enough for Sophia to collect herself, fix her makeup, decide what came next. When we finally emerged, the hallway was empty except for one person. A woman in a sharp charcoal suit stood waiting, mid-40s, dark hair pulled back in a severe bun, carrying a leather portfolio that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. She straightened when she saw me. "Mr. Morrison," she said, "I'm Christine Valdez, General Manager of the Ritz-Carlton's Chicago. I apologize for the interruption, but there's a matter that requires your immediate attention." Sophia looked between us, confused. "Dad?" Christine's expression was carefully neutral, but I caught the slight tension around her eyes. "Sir, I wasn't aware you were attending an event here today. When the incident in the ballroom was brought to my attention, I reviewed our systems and realized—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "The Ashford party booked this venue through our standard reservation system. They don't know who actually owns the property." Sophia's hand tightened on my arm. "Owns the property?" "The Ritz-Carlton Chicago is part of a hospitality portfolio acquired by Clearwater Holdings in 2019. Mr. Morrison holds majority ownership, which means Garrett's wedding is happening in my hotel," I finished quietly. The pieces fell into place across Sophia's face. Her eyes went wide. "Oh my God." Christine cleared her throat. "Sir, the Ashford party has an outstanding balance of $247,000 for tonight's celebration. Given the, circumstances, I wanted to confirm how you'd like me to proceed." $247,000. Patricia had bragged about the budget at the engagement party, making sure everyone knew how much they were spending on giving Sophia the wedding she deserved. Money they owed to me. "What are my options?" I asked. "You could forgive the debt entirely, or approve the charges as planned, or—" She hesitated. "Or exercise your right as majority owner to review the contract terms." Sophia was staring at me. "Dad, what are you going to do?" It would be easy, so easy. I could walk back into that ballroom and make an announcement. Let everyone know that Garrett's lavish wedding, every rose, every champagne flute, every note of that expensive string quartet, was happening on my dime, in my hotel, under my roof. The humiliation would be complete. But as I looked at my daughter's face, still red from crying, still beautiful despite everything, I realized something. This wasn't about Garrett anymore. "Come with me," I said to both of them. We walked back toward the ballroom. The double doors were propped open, and I could see inside. The chaos had settled into an uncomfortable simulation of normalcy. Guests milled around awkwardly. The DJ had stopped playing. Patricia stood near the head table, her phone pressed to her ear, her face tight with stress. Garrett was at the bar, surrounded by his groomsmen, all of them drinking like the alcohol could wash away what had just happened. I stepped into the doorway. Didn't announce myself. Just stood there. One by one, people noticed. Conversations died. Heads turned. Within 30 seconds, the entire room was silent, every eye on me. Christine stood slightly behind me, portfolio in hand, professional, waiting. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, my voice carried easily across the quiet room, "I apologize for the disruption to your evening. I know this has been unconventional." Nervous laughter rippled through the crowd. "I want to clarify something." I paused. "The Ritz-Carlton Chicago, where we are gathered tonight, is owned by Clearwater Holdings, my company. Which means this entire event, the venue, the catering, the accommodations, is happening in a property that I own." The silence deepened. You could have heard a champagne cork drop. Garrett's face went from pale to green. Patricia lowered her phone slowly, her mouth opening in a soundless O.
The Ashford family has an outstanding balance of $247,000 for tonight's celebration. Garrett made a sound like a wounded animal. However, I held up a hand. Despite everything that has happened, I'm not interested in revenge. I'm not interested in humiliation. I'm only interested in my daughter's well-being. I turned to look at Sophia. She was crying again, but smiling through the tears. So here's what's going to happen. The bill is forgiven. Completely. Consider it a wedding gift. I looked directly at Garrett. But understand this. You owe me nothing financially. You owe my daughter everything morally. And whether you pay that debt is entirely up to you. I let that sink in. Try some dessert, beggar, I said softly, echoing his words from before. Here's the real taste of debt, the kind money can't cover. Then I took Sophia's hand, and we walked out together.
We didn't make it to the exit. "Mr. Morrison, wait, please." The voice came from behind us. Not Garrett, not Patricia, someone else. I turned. A man in his 60s stood near the head table, silver hair, expensive suit, the kind of weathered confidence that came from decades in boardrooms. I recognized him vaguely, one of Garrett's family connections, introduced briefly during cocktail hour. "Warren Hutchins," he said, extending his hand. "I'm on the board of Ashford Capital Management, Garrett's father's firm." I shook his hand, waited. "I owe you an apology," he continued. "And frankly, so does everyone in this room. What happened tonight was unconscionable." He glanced back at Garrett, who was still frozen at the bar. "I've known the Ashford family for 30 years. I thought I knew what kind of people they were. Tonight proved me wrong." Patricia appeared at his elbow, her composure cracking at the edges. "Warren, this isn't necessary." "Yes, it is." He turned to her, and his voice hardened. "You seated one of the most respected businessmen in private equity next to the kitchen. Your son assaulted him, and you stood by and watched. It was a misunderstanding." "It was contempt," he said flatly. "Contempt based on assumptions and arrogance." Other guests were gathering now, listening. The society reporters had their cameras out again. I should have left. Should have taken Sophia and walked away clean. But something held me there. Not vengeance, exactly. Something more like the need for truth to be spoken aloud. "Can I say something?" I asked quietly. The room went silent again. Warren stepped back, giving me space. I looked around at the faces, some guilty, some curious, some still shocked. Found Patricia. Found Garrett. Found Pierce and the groomsmen who'd laughed the loudest. I'm not angry. I'm disappointed. Not in you specifically, but in what tonight represents. Garrett opened his mouth, I held up a hand, and he closed it. For 6 months, I watched my daughter try to fit into a world that measured worth in stock portfolios and country club memberships. I watched her apologize for where she came from, for who raised her, for not being enough in your eyes. And I let it happen because she asked me to, because she believed love could bridge that gap. Sophia's hand tightened in mine. But here's what I learned tonight. You can't bridge a gap built on contempt. You can't build respect on assumptions, and you certainly can't build a marriage on humiliation. I turned to Garrett directly. He couldn't meet my eyes. You didn't just shove my face into that cake. You revealed exactly who you are when you think no one important is watching. You showed 200 people that your kindness has conditions, that your respect must be earned through wealth, that someone's value is determined by appearances. I made a mistake, a horrible mistake. No, you made a choice. Repeatedly.
At the rehearsal dinner, at the engagement party. Every time you treated me like I was less than human because I drove the wrong car or wore the wrong suit. I paused. The mistake was assuming no one would ever call you on it. Warren Hutchins cleared his throat. Mr. Morrison, for what it's worth, Ashford Capital will be reviewing our relationship with the family. Behavior like this reflects poorly on everyone associated with the name. Patricia's face went white. Warren, you can't. I can, and I will. He looked at Garrett with something close to disgust. Your father built that firm on integrity. You've tarnished it in a single evening. Around the room, I watched other guests pull out phones, making calls, sending messages, the social calculus shifting in real time as people distanced themselves from the scandal. I picked up an abandoned champagne glass from the nearest table, raised it. A toast, I said. The room held its breath. To humility, I said clearly. The only inheritance worth giving, the only currency that actually matters, and the only thing that can't be bought, borrowed, or faked. I took a sip, set the glass down. My daughter deserves better than this. Better than a family that values appearances over character. Better than a man who measures love in tax brackets. I looked at Sophia. And she knows it now. Patricia swayed, actually swayed. For a moment I thought she might faint. Someone, Warren maybe, caught her elbow. Garrett was crying, silent tears streaming down his face, not from remorse, I suspected, from the sudden, crushing weight of consequences he'd never expected to face. I'd never raised my voice, never insulted anyone, never threatened. But watching the Ashford empire crumble under the weight of truth spoken calmly, that was vindication enough. Good night, I said to the room. And this time, when Sophia and I walked toward the exit, no one stopped us.
We made it to the hotel lobby before Sophia stopped walking. She stood beneath the crystal chandelier, still in her wedding dress, and turned to face the ballroom behind us. I need to go back, she said. You don't owe them anything. Not for them, from me. She walked back through those double doors with her spine straight, her chin high. I followed a few steps behind, watching my daughter become someone new in real time. The ballroom had fractured into smaller conversations, damage control in progress. Patricia on her phone, voice sharp. Warren Hutchins gathering his things. Garrett still at the bar, staring at nothing. Sophia walked straight to him. The room noticed. Conversation stopped. Cameras turned. Garrett, she said. Her voice didn't waver. He looked up, hope flickering across his face like a dying light. Garrett, thank God, we can fix this. I'm calling off the marriage. The words landed like stones in still water. Ripples of shock spread through the watching crowd. What? No, Sophia, please. He reached for her hand. She pulled back. You humiliated my father, the man who raised me alone, who worked himself to exhaustion so I could have a future, who never once made me feel like I was less than enough. Her voice strengthened. And you treated him like garbage because he drove an old car and wore a simple suit. I didn't know who he was. Exactly. You didn't know. You didn't ask. You didn't care. You saw someone you thought was beneath you and decided that gave you permission to be cruel. She shook her head. That's not the kind of man I can build a life with. Patricia materialized beside Garrett. Sophia, don't be rash. Every couple has difficulties. This isn't a difficulty, Mrs. Ashford. This is a revelation. I've spent 6 months trying to be good enough for you, for your family, for this world you live in, and tonight I realized something. I was already enough. I was always enough. You're the ones who are lacking. Garrett's face crumpled. I love you. No, you don't.
Her voice was gentle but final. "You love the idea of me, the girl you could elevate, the project you could perfect, but you never loved me for who I actually am." She pulled off her engagement ring. 3 carats, platinum band, probably cost more than most people's cars. She placed it carefully on the bar beside him. "I'm sorry this ended this way, but I'm not sorry it ended." She turned and walked back to me. Tears were streaming down her face, but she was smiling, actually smiling. I held out my arms and she collapsed into them, sobbing against my shoulder the way she had when she was small and the world felt impossibly big. "I'm so sorry, Dad, for everything, for asking you to endure their treatment, for doubting you, for choosing him over—" "Shh! You have nothing to apologize for." "Yes, I do. You tried to show me, so many times, and I was too blind to see it." I pulled back, cupped her face in my hands the way I had in the parking lot last night. "You weren't blind, you were hopeful. There's a difference. Hope built on humiliation isn't hope, it's delusion." I smiled. "Now you see what I wanted you to learn all along." "What?" "That respect isn't something you earn by changing who you are. It's something you demand by refusing to accept less than you deserve." I wiped her tears with my thumbs. "Love without respect isn't love, sweetheart. It's bondage. And you're too strong, too brilliant, too extraordinary to ever settle for that." She laughed through her tears. "When did you get so wise?" "The day you were born and I realized I was responsible for teaching you what you're worth." Behind us, the wedding that was no longer a wedding continued its slow collapse. Guests leaving, staff cleaning up, the Ashford family dealing with the aftermath of their own arrogance. But Sophia and I, we were already somewhere else. We were free. "What do we do now?" she asked. "Whatever you want. This is your life, Sophia. Not theirs, not even mine. Yours." She nodded, straightened her shoulders. "Then let's go home." Home sounds perfect. We walked out of the Ritz-Carlton together, father and daughter, equals, partners in the truest sense. Behind us, the crystal chandeliers still glittered, but ahead of us, the whole world waited.
3 days later, I sat on a bench overlooking Lake Michigan. The water stretched out like hammered silver under the afternoon sun, endless and indifferent to human drama. Waves rolled in with patient rhythm, the same way they had for millennia, long before the Ashfords existed, and long after they'd be forgotten. I'd come here often when Sophia was young, when the weight of being both parents felt too heavy, when business decisions kept me awake at night, when I questioned every choice I'd made. The lake never had answers, but it had perspective. My phone had been ringing for 3 days straight, reporters wanting statements, business associates expressing shock, a few former colleagues I hadn't spoken to in years suddenly eager to reconnect now that my story had gone viral. The wedding footage was everywhere. Social media, news sites, think pieces about wealth and humility and the poison of inherited arrogance. I had ignored it all. "I thought I'd find you here." Sophia appeared beside the bench, wearing jeans and a Northwestern sweatshirt. No makeup, hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. She looked younger, lighter, like someone who'd set down a burden she'd been carrying too long. "Mind if I sit?" "Never." She settled beside me, and for a while we just watched the water. A jogger passed. A family with small children fed the gulls, despite the signs asking them not to. Life continuing in its stubborn, ordinary way. "I've been thinking about the Clearwater Agreement," she said finally. "The real one, not just the company name." "And?" "I get it now. Why you hid everything. Why you lived the way you did." She turned to face me. "You were teaching me that wealth without character is just numbers on a screen. That respect isn't bought. It's proven. Every single day." I smiled. "You were always smarter than me." "No, I was just too stubborn to listen." She looked back at the lake.
I spent 6 months trying to earn respect from people who were never going to give it because I was measuring myself by their standards instead of my own. And now? Now I know the difference between being valued and being valuable. One depends on other people's opinions. The other just depends on who you choose to be when no one's watching. A sailboat cut across the horizon, white against blue, freedom in motion. The Clearwater Agreement wasn't just about hiding money. It was about creating space for you to discover your own worth, to build something that belonged to you, not to inheritance or expectations or someone else's definition of success. You wanted me to know struggle. I wanted you to know strength, real strength, the kind that comes from facing obstacles and choosing dignity anyway, the kind that doesn't need a trust fund to validate it. She leaned her head on my shoulder. Thank you. For what? For being patient, for letting me make mistakes, for staying silent when silence must have felt like swallowing glass. Her voice wavered. For loving me enough to let me learn the hard way. I put my arm around her, held her close the way I had 1,000 times before, through scraped knees and failed tests and broken hearts, and now this, the biggest heartbreak she'd faced yet. That's what parents do. We hold space for our children to become who they're meant to be, even when it hurts, especially when it hurts. We sat there as the sun began its slow descent toward the horizon. The sky turned amber, then gold, then that particular shade of pink that only exists in moments of transition. Day becoming night, endings becoming beginnings. Sophia's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, then silenced it. Garrett's been texting. And nothing. Some doors close for good reason. She looked at me. I'm thinking about going back to school, maybe getting my MBA, building something of my own. Using your trust fund? She smiled. What trust fund? The one I set up when you were born, 8 figures. Been waiting for you to be ready for it. Her eyes went wide. Dad! It's yours. Always has been. I just wanted you to know yourself before you knew your net worth. I squeezed her shoulder. Now you do. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she laughed, real and full and free. You're unbelievable. I'm a father. It's in the job description. The sun touched the horizon, painting the lake in colors that had no names. We watched it sink lower, minute by minute, neither of us rushing the moment. That day at the wedding, I said softly, I didn't lose a daughter. Sophia looked up at me, tears catching the dying light. I gained her respect. She smiled through her tears. You always had it, Dad. I just finally understood why. And there on a bench by Lake Michigan, with the sun setting on the worst and best day of our lives, we sat together in the kind of peace that only comes after storms have passed. The Clearwater Agreement was complete. Not because I had hidden my wealth, but because my daughter had finally discovered hers.
So here's my question for you. Was I right to handle it this way? Tell me in the comments below, what would you have done in my position? If you enjoyed this story, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel for more real-life tales, and turn on notifications so you never miss the next one. Because trust me, there's so much more on this channel. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next life story.